excited to talk to you guys here about this concept of what I call build or buy, uh, and strategic staffing for long-term success. And what I'm talking about here is, when you're a founder, when you're an entrepreneur, when you're building a team, one of the biggest questions that comes up is, do I use contractors? Do I use an agency? Or do I build and hire, recruit an in-house team? Uh, we we at ThinkSys, we are obviously a software development agency, and we've seen a lot of companies make both decisions, and we've seen it go a lot of different ways. And and not just about development, talking about development, sales, marketing. There's so many options and agencies and contractors you can work with. Knowing when to bring something in-house versus when to outsource, that can be such a critical decision for your success. So the first question I think that comes up in a lot of people's minds is, why even consider outsourcing? For example, if you're a venture-backed startup, if you talk to investors, almost all of them will say, you want everyone in-house, hire everyone full-time. They're more, they'll be more deeply aligned with your mission. You'll have more control over the culture. Investors as a whole don't always like outsourced team. And these are all, true statements. However, there are several things that make in-house teams, that are several cons as well to in-house team. Finding the right people, like the right people, can be hard. And when you have, and in-house teams are both significantly more expensive and often require a much longer term commitment. When you hire someone in-house, you're really making a commitment that they'll be with you for several years. And while for some roles that might be necessary, there's a lot of other places where you might only need someone for a few months or part-time. There are many companies that have used agencies successfully to grow, and I wanted to name a few huge companies that grew, building, largely from outsourcing. Calendly, Slack, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. We use Calendly internally. I use a Calendly link to book all of my sales calls and all of my meetings. And Fab, which raised hundreds of millions of dollars and initially grew using outsourced teams. Let me talk a little bit about myself here. My name, before I get into the nitty gritty, I wanted to just give you guys a little bit of a background about myself. Why should you listen to me on this topic? So on my side, I am Anshul Jain. I'm the CTO of ThinkSys. We have a team of about 450 plus engineers in India, and I oversee them and help manage and work with all of our clients on helping them succeed. And so I've seen different ways that outsourcing has worked well and hasn't worked well for them. And then on the flip side, previously I was a founder of a company called CapEx, where I was the CTO, and where we built our own cap table management platform that I built and sold, built over 3 years and sold in January 2018. Additionally, I'm an angel investor and startup advisor, and I've invested in 15 plus companies, advised a number more, and previously had built, even been a large scale event organizer, organizing SB Hacks, where we raised over $100,000 in sponsorship, built and launched an event series that's still running to this day with 550 plus people. So I just wanted to walk you through the agenda a little bit for today. Today we're gonna, the things I want to talk about are, first I'm going to go over a little bit of, what are some of the pros and cons between sourcing, outsourcing. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what are the key questions to ask yourself when you're making the decision. And then then I've got a few case studies I'll walk you through, companies that either have done well or done, different examples of ways that outsourcing has worked for companies, or worked or didn't work for companies. And then I'm gonna talk a little bit more deeply just about engineering. Talk about designing your ideal engineering team and what that might look like, and what are the different ways to slice an engineering team. And then I want to talk to you, then I'll talk to you a little bit about if you do go with the outsourcing route, what does it mean to find the right partner? What are the things to look for? And from there, we'll open up a little bit with Q&A and final thoughts. So to talk a little bit about, the pros and cons, what it works well for insourcing, what works well for outsourcing, or what is good about insourcing, which is what I call in-house teams, and what's good about outsourcing. When we talk about insourcing, the things that work that are really good is you're going to have really direct control over the team, the process, the culture is usually a little tighter. And it's usually the highest alignment because somebody who's willing to come and work for you full time is usually deeply aligned, especially as an early stage company, they'll be deeply aligned with your mission. The cons are for example, you have a lengthy hiring process. It can be very hard to find the right talent. It can take a while to find the right person. If you have an urgent need or something that you really need to get done, that can be that can be the difference between success and failure. Because as you know, for a startup and for really any company, speed is one of the principal predictors of success. There's a reason Facebook went with the philosophy of move fast and break things. It's because speed to market and iterating quickly is one of the most important things to being a successful company. Um, Additionally, insourcing can be very expensive. Not only are you paying salaries, you have to pay benefits, etc. You have to pay benefits, perks, all of that. And on top of that, you'll have reduced flexibility on your team, which means that for example, if the role or the dynamics of the role shifts, then if you have someone in-house, you have to either choose to let them go or retrain them or shift them into a new role or create a new role for them. And that can be, and managing that process, especially when flexibility is paramount for a lot of companies and being able to be dynamic, that can have a lot of impact. On the flip side, for outsourcing, right? It can be very cost effective, and you can get access to global talent and niche skills. Where there's some things like security or certain things that you might not need somebody full time, or something that's very specific and hard to find. You might be able to find a contractor for that, or find somebody part time, to fill that need instead of bringing in someone. Instead of having to spend years or months trying to find someone full time to fill that role. And then, as I talked about with the insourcing, the increased flexibility and focus that you can get when you outsource, where you can really focus in on what are the things that I as a company do well and focus on that internally versus and allow the secondary things to shift out. And that's one of the things I'll talk about a little more about some of the questions to ask yourself. But when it comes to some of the cons and some of the things in outsourcing that don't work well, what you'll see is you'll have communication. Like sometimes, and these are very common complaints with outsourcing, and while some of them can be managed, these are common to think about. Especially working with global teams, communication challenges and cultural shifts, and the culture dynamics is something that you really have to consider, as different countries and different cultures have different expectations on work, different styles of communicating. And so that can be a challenge that will impact you until you figure out the right way to communicate. And we've seen this happen over and over again where, companies that they don't figure out the right way to communicate, or they're not effective communicators. When you have time zones and language barriers, the challenges build up. Additionally, you create a little more management overhead, where you have to, if you outsource work, you really do have to invest a little bit in managing them effectively. You want to make sure that the work, they're working effectively. It's seldom a set it and forget it process, and more so a set it and watch the delivery process. Another item to consider is like the risk of control. The same way when you build an in-house team, everyone is, your direct employee and you're working with them one to one. When you have an outsourced team, you you don't fully control their employment or uh, their day to day, and so that can be a factor that will that can be a factor, as especially as you grow or think about growing. How do you manage their career growth or make sure that you retain the right people? And so and this is an area where finding the right partner can be critical to your success. Another item with outsourcing is how the quality can vary. There's such a wide range in firms, where you have firms that will you know double bill and not work 100% or overcharge and underdeliver. And then you have rock star firms that will go above and beyond and put their money where their mouth is, and are working hard to make you succeed. And I think this speaks further to the misalignment of incentives, where, a lot of times if you're a startup or a company, you can give equity, or you can, align incentives a little more, versus with an outsourced company, sometimes there can be a misalignment of incentives. And if it's not thought, thought through, that can be a factor that will, that can be something that impacts your relationship or your working relationship. Hmm. So now to talk through some of the key decision points, or the key things for you to consider as you're thinking about, do I insource something, or do I outsource? And here I'm going to talk a little more about get a little more deeply into software, because this is where we have the most experience, or where I have the most experiences. You know, sh- how should you decide whether, I've got a company, I'm building a company, and I've got to decide whether I want to build an in-house engineering team, find a CTO, or hire a user development agency. And so the first question I ask everyone is, how critical is software to delivering your value, or your company value? I'm like, and what is critical about it, right? Is it, you know, for example, if you are uh, if you're a SaaS company, then your entire product is the software solution. And but diving one level down, is it a is it the software itself, that, like, is it the algorithm that is critical? Is it the UX? Is it your integrations? What are the elements of the product that are critical to delivering value? Another example is, if you're like a community application, if you're a community or a network, you know, so a lot of times you'll decide to build an app to as a way to connect the members of your community, but your real value is the community. And in that example, you know, building in that example, hiring an in-house engineering team could end up becoming a cost center for you, because you may not need to be continually developing on the application. You may have development you want to do here and there, but you're not going to be always developing an application or constantly investing in software. And so there's a situation where what you really want to focus on internally is, how do we best deliver value to our community? And then you may consider outsourcing the actual building of the application, while maintaining all of your community relations managers, and bring that in house. Another key question to ask yourself is, how hard is the engineering challenge? A good heuristic is, like, the harder the engineering challenge, the more likely you want to bring it in house. The most If you have something that is a really complex engineering challenge that is critical to delivering your value, you really want to make sure build the skills to deliver that in house. Um, on the flip side, if a lot of applications these days are actually pretty straightforward. Most e-commerce or SaaS applications are really, they're actually doing some pretty simple development. There's complexity, of course, but so many of the tools are well worn. There's so many abstractions that building those sorts of applications is actually not the most, it's not the biggest risk to your business is being able to build it effectively. The risk to your business is more, can you sell it, or do people want it, or can you market it effectively? And so those are the places where you want to be investing your time and energy, and then there you might want to outsource like a simple application. You may want to just outsource the development because you're not worried about the risk of being able to build it. Another question to ask is, what is your network like? Do you have access to strong engineers? For example, some people, they come from a technical background, maybe they study computer science, or maybe they just have a lot of friends in engineering, or you previously worked at a company where you have good relationships with a lot of the engineers. Do you have the ability to recruit or find some people that you trust and like, and know you can work with? Versus for other folks, other folks, if you don't have like a technical background or you haven't worked with engineers before, you may not have access to some strong engineers or have the ability to find and vet strong engineers. And if you have that issue, if that comes up, then you really need to then building an engineering team can actually be a big risk because you don't have the ability to manage that team. And that leads right into my next question of, is there someone technical on your team today, right? Do you have an in-house CTO? Because if you have an in-house CTO, then, then you'll lean on them on how they want to manage. You'll lean on them on how they want to manage their engineering team. They'll be able to manage your technology strategy within in-house team much more effectively. Some of the other questions I like to walk through here is, what is your technology strategy look like over a 5-year plan? How much development are you doing on a month-to-month or year-to-year basis? Is it, you're doing development in pieces, you get some feedback, and then you plan another phase of development? Or is it more that you're constantly building out products and you have a suite of products you're going to be building out? Because if the more constant your development team, often the better it is to at least maintain some development in-house so that you have that core. That core. Another question is, how defined are your requirements? If you have very clear definitions on, this is what we need to build, that's usually a situation where it can be really easy to outsource because you have such a clear requirement. Whereas if things are really fuzzy and they're constant, things are changing like day to day, week to week, working with an outsourced team can actually end up being really challenging, and that because of that up and down nature. And so it may make more sense to bring it in-house. And so these are all, like, you want to consider all of these factors when you're deciding your technology strategy. Do you need someone full time for an extended period? Is it more like some part-time work? And so these are all the factors you'll consider, right? And I think the thing I wanted you to take away from this is, there's not a one size fits all answer to building the right engineering team, or insourcing or outsourcing. It's really dependent on you, your company, your needs, and building a strategy and thinking through that strategy. So now I'm going to walk through a few examples of different companies that we have worked with, and either we have worked with or whose founders I know, that I can talk through a little bit about what worked well for what didn't work for them. So here I'm going to talk about company A. This is a company they're building platform tools for development. So it's a strong software platform. It's entirely a full software development. It's entirely dev tools. So they're handling, millions of transactions per second. It had a very complex architecture, but they did have a very strong CTO co-founder, and they were able to raise a pre-seed round, so they had a decent amount of capital to work with. So we had a relationship with them, and so they actually ended up coming to us for their first engineer, and we were able to bring them to market in 4 months from the start of development. They've pivoted twice since they founded it, but they've now raised $20 million. They're approaching 5 million ARR. And now what their team looks like as they've grown is, what they've done is their CTO, they have a VP of engineering, and they have about 3 to 4 engineers in-house working for them directly. And then they've built out outsourcing operations where They have about 20 engineers in India and about 10 engineers in Latin America. And so they've built out these outsource development teams, which gives them some flexibility on their development operations, gives them some flexibility to scale up and scale down as needed. But they've maintained their kind of like core strategy and architecture in-house. This has proven to be quite effective for them. And they're, as I've seen, they're actually they've crossed 5 million ARR since. They're doing quite well. And here's another example of a company where they were building something on LLMs, an LLM based tool for medical professionals. They had a non-technical founding team, so there was nobody on their technical team who could code. They was really it was really founded by the medical professionals. But they had a very, very clear use case in the customer persona, and they were self-funding and bootstrapping the business. Um, but because they had a very clear use case, what they did was they came to us and said, we want you to build an MVP for us. And so we worked with them. We built an MVP in 2.5 months. We went to beta in 4 months. Now they're growing quickly. Growing quickly with in their field. They have a fully outsourced team of engineers. They're out of beta within the first year. They've achieved their HIPAA compliance. And so this is an example, I think, where if I were to really look at what worked well for this company, it was that they had a very clear use case of what to build. They were not shifting up and down a little bit. They were not constantly shifting on what the product looks like or what the product is being built, and they actually went through a process of kind of doing some wireframing and designs before they even came to us for development. So they knew what they were going to build, and so because of that, they were able to be effective with an outsourced development team. And then I'll give an example here for company C, where this was a company where these were a group of guys where they were successful entrepreneurs. They were a successful real estate. One was a successful real estate entrepreneur. The other one was a very successful hospitality entrepreneur. And they were OnlyFans competitor. They wanted to build a competitor to the site OnlyFans, basically a fan subscription site for fans to be able to subscribe to their favorite creators. And they had a lot of connections with creators and content creators. They had some ability to. But what ended up happening is they bought some code from an agency. They came to us after 2 months without results there. The code had a lot of holes. The code that they had bought had a lot of holes. It was really poorly designed, and it required a lot of time and money to fix, and it continued to cause problems. What ended up happening was their founding team was distracted working on other projects. They outsourced the project management and the vision. So they had an outsourced project manager, and they were constantly changing the product direction week to week. So they could never quite find product because they weren't sure what product market fit was. And they weren't sure what they were building. Because of that, they just ended up spinning their wheels over a couple of years and didn't know because of a couple of years and ended up folding the project. So this is an example, I think, where outsourcing really bit them in the butt, because I think if they had brought some of these people in-house, they would have at least identified quicker that things weren't working. Or if the founding team was not distracted and was working full time on the project. So. And by the way, guys, as we go through this, if anybody has questions, feel free to post them in the chat, and I'll be happy to address them as they come up. So let's talk a little bit about, designing your ideal engineering team. As I mentioned earlier, there's really no one size fits all advice. It's so dependent on you as a company, what you're building, the space you're in, what makes sense for you, how much cash you have available, all of these things matter. Um, that said, one of the ways I like to think about it when I give advice to founders and teams is there's a big difference between strategic roles and execution roles. Your CTO is a strategic role. The developers are execution roles. Um, it is I tend to believe that it's quite easy to outsource execution. There that's But on the flip side, outsourcing strategy is very, very risky. Um, Especially the early you are, the more important it is to have I think, really strong strategic roles in house. And then outsourcing the execution actually allows you some flexibility because you can scale up, scale down, shift roles as needed as your strategy shifts. You can shift where you're spending money on execution. Um, and so one of the things I urge people to think deeply about is what roles do you need someone full time in? For example, for an early stage company, you might not need a full time designer. You might not need you can contract out a designer, but instead what you might want is, a full time CTO. Or maybe the design is the most critical part of your product, and that's what's going to be the game changer. In that case, you might really need a full-time you might want to choose a full-time designer, make sure you have your product designed well, but the product is actually a really easy product. In that case, you might outsource the execution or outsource the development. you know you Another thing to think about is, how much flexibility you need, how rapidly you need to iterate on the software. Like, do you have like an MVP and then you don't know what to build after that, so you want to build the MVP and then have some time to get feedback? Or do you have, like, a 2-year roadmap that you need to develop on? Um, and so these are the things for you to think about. But I'll leave you again with the thought of strategy, of differentiating your strategic roles versus your execution roles, and defining what roles do you need someone full time in. And the more full time you need someone, and the more strategic the role is, the more you should bias for bringing that role in house. And then the last thing I'll leave you with is, sourcing the right partner. What does it mean to source the right partner? If you do outsource, here are some things to look for when it comes to finding the right partner. One, tap your network. Look for referrals. Look for someone who has people that can vouch for them. The best companies will have a deep bench of referrals that they can give you. And actually check their references. Make sure to actually come prepared with detailed questions, actually have the conversations. You'd be surprised by how many people ask for references and then never call them. You really want to make sure that you actually are doing the reference check, making sure that things are that they are that they have a track record of actually delivering the work that they say they deliver. Um, Another thing to look for is white box, not black box teams. You want to look for companies that communicate effectively, where you can talk to the developers, you'll be able to interact with people, because what you don't want is to work with somebody that will, disappear for a week and you know, come back with, and having built something that's maybe not exactly what you need. You want to be able to have continuous communication. And the other thing I'll say is, avoid companies that try to lock you into long-term contracts. I have always found that the companies that are trying to lock you into long-term contracts are usually they will deliver early and then very quickly fall off once you're locked in. Um, what you want it like what you want is a company that stands by their word. The number of companies that have come to us, or where they're like, yes, we're stuck in this, like, we're so frustrated with this development team, or we're so frustrated with this partner, but we're stuck in the contract for another 6 months. And we sometimes they have to eat the 6 months. Sometimes they have to sometimes we work with them to create a transition plan. But we have found is that the more you kind of sit in the contract, the longer the term of the contract, the more you can kind of get stuck. And the next thing I'll say is, once you decide on a firm, stay involved and make sure that you hold them accountable. You want to really managing the relationship effectively is key to success. So with that, thank you all for your time. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Let me know.
Yeah, everyone, thank you guys all so much for joining. As I mentioned earlier, we will be sharing the recording as well to you guys, just in case you guys did happen to miss it or you guys want it. We will definitely do that. And it looks like we have a question here from Parthena.
Yes. It's a great question, partner. The potential risks and challenges of outsourcing. It's the risks are always around the fact. I think the key risk to consider is that when and one of the other things to think about with outsourcing here is that there's different flavors of outsourcing. I gave this presentation more from the lens of outsourcing to an agency, but there's also versions of just like outsourcing to a individual contractor part time or hiring a part time contractor. Um, but really, the biggest risk is that um, when you're outsourcing one most outsourced when you're outsourcing it's pretty much always a cash relationship. But when you have in-house teams, you can usually align incentives with equity, or stock options, um, or find other ways to align incentives. But with a contractor, it's usually a much more transactional relationship. And so sometimes, especially if you end up with like a bad contractor, you can and the incentives aren't aligned, and you might have to really be working hard to try to get work out of them. So I think the key things to ensuring a successful partnership is really staying involved, setting clear deliverables and clear guidelines on your expectations on what success looks like. What success looks like in a relationship, and constantly working with them to make sure that you're seeing the output you want to see, and making sure that you don't leave them in a silo to go disappear, to go do work on their own without really like making sure that they're moving in the right direction. And this is also true about managing an in-house team, right? You don't want to give a developer a task in-house and then like leave him alone for 2 weeks and hope that he built the right thing. You want to be available for questions. Uh, but I think that sort of alignment and incentive is much more becomes much more significant, much more important to invest in once you start looking at outsourcing.